She had a name no one was allowed to speak outside these walls. She had a face no man outside the royal bloodline was ever supposed to see, and yet she charged the fate of an empire from inside a room she could never leave. The Mughal Harem. History has romanticized it, painters have eroticized it, and Hollywood has barely scratched its surface. But what actually existed behind those sandstone walls, behind the marble lattice screens and the silk curtains, was something far more terrifying than any fantasy. It was a city inside a city, a shadow government with no public face, a world where a whispered word in the right ear
The prince cannot be trusted.
could place a man on the peacock throne, or send him to his death before sunrise. And at the center of it all, not the emperor, the woman he locked away, the fortress behind the palace. Picture Fatehpur Sikri at its height, the red sandstone city that Emperor Akbar built from nothing in the late 1500s, rising from the flat plains of Agra like a fever dream. Massive, deliberate, and slightly impossible. Now walk past the Diwan-e-Khas, the hall of private audience. Keep walking. Past the carved pavilions and the ornamental pools. Past the gods who stand still as statues, eyes forward, trained to see nothing. You have reached the Zenana. The inner world of the Mughal Harem was not a single room or even a single building. It was an entire complex, and its peak under Emperor Akbar. Contemporary sources suggest anywhere between 5 and 8,000 people lived within harem quarters, depending on the capital city. Wives, concubines, female relatives, servants, attendants, and an enormous invisible workforce that kept it all functioning in perfect, terrifying silence. It was called the Mahal, the sacred interior, and no adult male outside the royal family could enter it and live. The walls were real, the rules were absolute, and the architecture itself was designed as a form of psychological control. Not just keeping outsiders out, but keeping those inside contained, watched, and dependent. Abul Fazl, the court chronicler of Akbar, described the harem in his monumental work, the Ain-e-Akbari, with almost reverent precision. He documented its layout, its regulations, its chain of command. But even Abul Fazl, one of the most trusted men in the empire, never entered its innermost chambers. He recorded what he was told. He documented what was allowed to be known, which means everything he wrote came filtered through a machine of silence and selective truth. What lived beneath that surface, nobody was supposed to find out. The eunuchs, the empire's shadow intelligence network. The first thing you need to understand about the Mughal harem is who actually ran it. Not the emperor, not even the most senior wife. The eunuchs, thousands of them ranging from household managers to the most powerful political operatives in the entire empire, and the most dangerous of them had a title, the Nazir, the superintendent, the man, or rather the figure who controlled all movement, all information, and all access in and out of the harem. Castrated men had served in royal courts across the Islamic world for centuries before the Mughals. But what the Mughal system created was something different, a formalized intelligence apparatus disguised as domestic management. The eunuchs stood at every threshold. They accompanied royal women on the rare occasions those women moved beyond the harem walls. They carried messages. They managed the internal economy, and the harem had a significant internal economy because senior wives and the dowager empress controlled enormous jagirs, land grants that generated real income and real political influence. A senior royal woman in the Mughal harem was not prisoner with no power. She was a political actor with resources, and the eunuchs were her reach into the outside world. Here is the terrifying part. Because adult men couldn't enter the harem, the emperor himself depended on eunuchs to know what was happening inside it. The same eunuchs who served the women were reporting to the emperor, and the emperor's knowledge was only as honest as the eunuchs allowed it to be. Control the information, control the emperor. This is not speculation. Mughal court records and accounts of European travelers like the Venetian merchant Niccolò Manucci, who spent decades in Mughal India in late 1600s, describe a system where harem politics, driven largely through eunuchs networks, directly shaped imperial decisions. Manucci, who eventually worked as a physician in Mughal courts and had unusual access to courtly gossip, recorded stories of eunuchs accepting bribes to carry secret letters, manipulating which petitions reached the emperor, and disappearing problems quietly. Disappearing problems, let that sit with you. The Mughal harem was not a democracy of suffering. There was a rigid, brutal hierarchy, and understanding it explains almost every palace conspiracy in Mughal history. At the very top, the Padshah Begum, the first lady of the empire. Historically, this was the emperor's mother, not his most beloved wife. The Mughal system placed immense formal power with the Dowager Empress. She held court within the harem, received petitions, distributed charity, and most critically controlled access to the emperor during his private hours. Aurangzeb's mother Mumtaz Mahal, yes, the same woman for whom the Taj Mahal was built, held this position during Shah Jahan's reign at a level of intimacy and influence that no other consort quite matched. But it was women like Nur Jahan, the Empress of Jahangir, who demonstrated what happened when a brilliant political mind was given harem power and chose to use every inch of it. Nur Jahan is perhaps the most documented example of a Mughal woman who effectively co-ruled an empire. She appeared on imperial coins, she issued farmans, royal decrees in her own name, she managed military campaigns from the harem's interior, coordinating through messengers and her own family network. Jahangir, consumed by opium and wine, often admitted in his own memoirs, the Tuzuke Jahangiri, that he had delegated enormous authority to her. She didn't just influence the emperor, she was for stretches of Jahangir's reign, the emperor. But beneath Nur Jahan's dazzling political success was something darker. The reminder that every woman in the hierarchy, no matter how powerful, was also a hostage to it. Nur Jahan's position evaporated the moment Jahangir died. Her stepson Shah Jahan banished her to Lahore with a small pension. The most powerful woman in the empire was reduced in one afternoon to a comfortable prisoner. She spent her final years building Jahangir's tomb, working, creating, refusing to disappear quietly, but she disappeared anyway. The Mughal harem housed thousands of women, royal wives, concubines, servants, attendants, and almost no men outside the bloodline, or the eunuchs. What happened when desire refused to follow the rules? Historical records are predictably cautious about this, but caution is not the same as absence. Manucci, whose accounts are colored by his European perspective but grounded in genuine courtly proximity, recorded multiple allegations of secret communications between harem women and men outside, guards, merchants who visited adjacent bazaars, nobles attempting to use servants as intermediaries. His accounts describe a shadow postal system, notes hidden in flower arrangements delivered by women vendors, who were among the few outsiders allowed through certain checkpoints. More structurally, the Mughal system itself acknowledged the possibility of transgression, which is why the penalties were so catastrophic. For a woman of royal blood discovered in any form of forbidden contact, death, not public execution, which would have created scandal, silent elimination. The accounts of what this looked like vary. Some resources mention women being quietly strangled in their chambers. Others speak of forced drowning in the harem's ornamental tanks, bodies disposed of before dawn. For the man involved, something worse than death because it was designed to be the witnessed public execution, often grotesque and deliberate, as a message to every man who served near the harem's edges. The architecture itself was built to prevent these moments. The jali screens, the carved lattice windows, that allows those inside to see out while remaining invisible, were not decorative. They were surveillance infrastructure. A royal woman could observe the public courtyard from behind her screen, unseen, unreachable, watching a world she could look at but never fully touch. Some historians have argued this arrangement created a particular kind of psychological torment: visibility without participation, agency without freedom, power without personhood. Every woman in the Mughal harem understood one absolute truth: a son changed everything. The Mughal system of succession had no primogeniture, meaning it was not automatically the eldest son who inherited the throne. Theoretically, any of the emperor's sons could make a claim, and every one of those sons had a mother inside the harem, each of them watching, calculating, surviving. The politics of pregnancy in the Mughal harem were savage. One senior wife or favored concubine became pregnant, the atmosphere in the harem reportedly shifted immediately. Alliances formed and dissolved overnight. Women who had been allies became rivals. Women who had been rivals sometimes became devastatingly, strategically friendly, because a pregnant woman who died of a sudden illness or lost her child to a mysterious miscarriage was a problem solved. Abul Fazl's Ain-e-Akbari documents the extraordinary precautions taken around imperial pregnancies. Food tasted by multiple attendants before it reached a pregnant woman. Physicians rotated to prevent any single person from gaining unique access. The pregnant woman's quarters sealed further and guarded more intensely. These were not paranoid flourishes. They were responses to real, documented history. Mughal chronicles record multiple instances of infant princes dying of illness that contemporaries described with suspicion. And the competition did not end at birth. It escalated, because the child who survived to become emperor and whose mother lived to see it would elevate the woman to the highest position in the empire. Pasha Begum, mother of the King of Kings, Aurangzeb's eventual seizure of power in 1658, his imprisonment of his own father Shah Jahan, his execution of his brother was in part the final expression of competition that had begun decades earlier inside the harem's walls. His mother Mumtaz Mahal was dead, but her family's faction was not. And the brutal clarity with which Aurangzeb eliminated his brothers was the end of a game that the harem had been playing for generations. Here is the part that doesn't get told. The harem had women who were not there by choice. Not all concubines entered willingly. Military conquest, tribute arrangements, and diplomatic gifts sent women from across South Asia, Persia, Central Asia, and the Deccan into the harem's interior. Some were sent by their own families. Calculated political exchanges dressed in the language of the honor. Some were captured, some were purchased. Once inside, they were categorized, ranked, assigned. The Ain-e-Akbari describes a salary system for harem women that ranged from the extraordinarily generous senior wives receiving stipends that would have dwarfed the income of most nobles, to the minimal maintenance of the lower-ranking attendants, who functioned as little more than domestic labor. What all of them shared was the same closed horizon. There are no known memoirs written by these women, no private letters that survived in their own voices. What we know of them comes through the male chroniclers, through European travelers, through administrative records that reduced human lives to categories and payroll numbers. Their names, their stories, their fears, mostly gone. The Mughal harem was also home to some of the most sophisticated artistic culture in 16th and 17th century Asia. Women were educated in poetry, music, calligraphy, and painting. Female poets flourished inside its walls. Princess Zebun-Nisa, daughter of Aurangzeb, was one of the most celebrated Urdu poets of 17th century. Her Diwan-e-Makhfi, the collection of The Hidden One, survives. Her pen name Makhfi, the Hidden One. She wrote poetry of extraordinary emotional depth from inside a world that considered her public voice inappropriate. Her father eventually had her imprisoned, allegedly for alleged political correspondence with his rebellious son. She spent 18 years in Salimgarh Fort, writing until she died there, the hidden one, hidden even from the history that might have celebrated her. Here is what you are left with. The Mughal harem was not a fantasy. It was not a garden of earthly delights where bored emperors indulged themselves while history happened elsewhere. It was the engine room. Inside those walls, mothers shaped emperors, eunuchs controlled empires. Women with no formal title and no public voice decided which son sat on the peacock throne and which son was found dead in his bath. The luxury was real, the culture was extraordinary, and the culture was systematic. Which makes the Mughal harem so genuinely haunting is not the intrigue or the forbidden romance or the palace executions. Though all of that is real, what haunts you is the realization that its most powerful inhabitants could never fully be known, could never fully be heard, could never fully step outside its walls and say, "This is who I am, and this is what I did." They built empires in silence, and history, for too long, kept that silence for them, the hidden ones. If this is the history you have been waiting for, the stories that never made it into textbooks, the psychology that built and broke dynasties, subscribe to Empireon. We go where the history books stop.